Hello, everybody. I'm Jean-Baptiste Born. I'm the attaché for science and technology at the French Embassy in the US. I would like to thank all our panelists for being connected to this talk entitled Intelligent Imaging, the Evolution of AI in Biomedical Imaging, and congratulate UCSF QBI for the fantastic organization of this event. Many thanks to Elodie, Brient-Litzler, and Sharmila Majumdar for their moderation of this panel. We'll be dealing this morning with biomedical imaging, which has made tremendous progress in recent years, thanks to recent breakthroughs like deep learning and convolutional neural network. Consequently, we can see that we are more and more going from hype to value, in the sense that we start to see actual products going to the clinic. There is no doubt that this could shape the future of medicine by, for instance, helping physicians in their diagnosis, making this diagnosis faster and more accurate, and providing practitioners with more time to spend with the patients. However, how this evolution will take place and what are the next steps to cross this path from hype to value is what this panel is going to talk about. So now we will switch to the introduction of panelists, starting with Sharmila.
Good morning. My name is Sharmila Majumdar, and I'm a professor at University of California, San Francisco, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, good morning or evening if you're in France. My name is Elodie Brient-Litzler. I'm the head of innovation development for technologies at Institut Pasteur Tech Transfer Office. And I'm also the co-founder of the medical imaging startup Avatar Medical.
You're on mute.
Hello, my name is Dorin Comaniciu. I'm responsible for artificial intelligence and digital innovation at Siemens Healthineers, and I'm based in Princeton, New Jersey, US.
Hello, my name is Jayshree Kalpati Kramer. I'm a researcher at Mass General Hospital and a faculty at Harvard Medical School in Boston. And our lab does a lot of work in AI and imaging. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul Hamid Halabi. I am currently the Senior VP of Data and AI at the startup Tempus Labs, driving precision medicine with data, formerly the head of healthcare at NVIDIA Technologies.
Good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Hess. I'm professor and chair of radiology at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm also a neuroradiologist and imaging scientist.
Hello, I'm Stéphanie Lassonnière. I'm a professor of applied math and statistics in School of Medicine of University of Paris. I'm also fellow and deputy director of the Paris Artificial Intelligence Research Institute called PRAIRIE. And I'm also co-founder and president of the strategic advisory board of the startup Sonio.
Hi, I'm Stanley Dioleman. I am senior scientist at INRIA and team leader at the Paris Brain Institute at the Petit-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. And I'm also fellow of the Paris AI Research Institute. And I'm interested in modeling and predicting the progression of neurodegenerative diseases.
Hello, I'm Jean-Christophe Oliveau-Marin. I'm a professor at Institut Pasteur and the head of the biological image analysis unit here in Paris. I'm pleased to be with you.
All right. So good morning and good evening. Let's get started with our lovely panel discussion. We have a very eminent panel, and we will address issues of artificial intelligence in medical imaging. It is totally known to everybody who is on this webinar, that artificial intelligence in medical imaging has seen enormous growth across imaging, not just for simple image analysis, but from image acquisition, noise reduction, tailoring and designing the image acquisition, image segmentation, disease characterization from images, and then ultimately linking it with clinical data and modeling the trajectory and therapeutic response. It is with this in mind that actually at UCSF, we decided to set up the Center for Intelligent Imaging. But seeing how vast the applications of intelligent imaging can be in the biomedical field, for today's talk, we are going to be focusing on image and disease characterization. We will not be talking about image acquisition, and we will not be talking about model development explicitly for noise reduction, even though those are very, very large fields in themselves. So when we talk about disease and image characterization from images, one of the biggest currencies in this remain the images that we acquire. So in the first half of the session, we will be discussing essentially the absolute bounty on the need for curated and well annotated images and the way to train models, different methodologies to train the models. Ultimately, you have to have a fairly robust and generalizable model, which you can translate into the clinic to ultimately impact patient care. So with that in mind, this first section will be focused on the imaging data itself. And without further discussion of the topic in itself, let me broach the first question so our panelists can respond to it. And the question that I really have is, when you need large sources of image data, which is generalizable in order to train the artificial intelligence algorithms for analyzing or characterizing diseases from medical images, and you do not have them available at a single given place, what are the methods that work for acquiring large, well-curated data sets? So do we go into centralized repositories with centralized labeling, or is federated learning a solution? And I think I'm going to approach Dr. Comaniciu for the first response.
Thank you so much. So the question of data defines quite a bit when we talk about the system uncertainty. So we must consider the entire data pipeline, from the data generation to the value creation. And related to data, we see 4 interconnected stages. One is the data acquisition, curation, governance, and compliance. Number 2 is structure reading and annotations, algorithms and training, model deployment into product libraries. Number 3 is passing regulatory approval, where data again is very important. And number 4 is the topic of workflow integration, feedback from the field, closing the data loop, and iterative improvement of the product. So all these stages relate to data. In addition to that, it is very important to underline that we should approach AI as a system. And for that, we need to focus on characterizing the uncertainty of the system, right, to achieve predictive uncertainty. So for example, we need to understand the source of errors. We talk about epistemic uncertainty. We talk about aleatory uncertainty, randomness, and distribution uncertainty. So our approach is always, we have to go scientific on this, right? There is so much hype in the field, and we have to go back to the value creation, and we have to understand what is the science in order to control errors in the AI systems.
Thank you. Maybe we can move on to Dr. Kalpathy Kramer at this point.
Sure, I obviously completely agree with everything that was just mentioned. I think all of us that are in the field recognize that some of these models can be a little brittle. They cannot necessarily generalize as well as we hope they would. And the diversity of data that is presented to the model really helps with the robustness of the models as well. Because of all of the privacy and other concerns, sharing data is not always an option. And so methods such as federated learning can potentially help us as a community. In federated learning, the basic idea is that instead of necessarily having to export all of the data into a central repository, we can, as long as you have a set of partners that are willing to participate, learn models across institutions without the need for data sharing. And what we see is that some of these models can be a lot more robust in that they have seen a diversity of data from different scanner types, from different populations, with different disease presentations, with disease prevalences. And the fact that these models are exposed to a lot more data sometimes helps them be more robust.
Thank you. Before we move to our next panelist and request his input, I would just want to let the participants in this webinar know that questions for our panelists can be put into the QA section, which is seen on Zoom. And we will answer them as soon as we can get to them in the break times between the speakers. So with that, may I move to Dr. Halabi and ask Abdul, what are your thoughts in terms of these aspects of training models to make them robust, generalizable, and acquire large data sets?
Thank you, Sharmila. This is really one of the most exciting questions. I moved into healthcare personally because I thought that AI could have a massive impact, and it's proving itself as a method across the field. The good news is disease is rare, right? So if we look at the prevalence of any disease, even though it's really very, very painful, and I don't mean to diminish it, but you're looking at something below 0.5%. And that's really good news for us. However, it makes it very challenging to construct these large data sets, these large examples of cancer that physicians usually train on, right? If you're a trained physician, you spend 4 or 5 years being trained, and you get to see a diversity of issues. So how do we, of cases, so how do we show the same thing to a patient or to rather an AI algorithm? That's kind of the biggest challenge that we have, especially given privacy concerns. So while I think that it is ideal to create sort of this central and amazing database of all the examples that we've seen of each disease so that the computer can learn from them, this is really challenging. It's one of the hardest things to achieve. So what NVIDIA has shown, actually working with a French startup, Aachen, is the possibility of doing federated learning. And like Jayashri said, instead of bringing all of this data into one location, you're able to actually take the models into all of these different hospitals and allow them to learn at these hospitals, just like residents would do as they rotate from one department to the other. The results seem really exciting, and they help us create, generally more generalizable models that are more powerful. There's still more work to be done on it, I think, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much. One of the things that, besides acquiring large data sets, one of the issues that we faced, and I know many in the field have faced, is the issue of actually getting data which is curated or annotated in exactly the same way. The uncertainty of the gold standard and the uncertainty in terms of how different radiologists or physicians view a particular disease state always becomes an issue. And I'm going to reach out to Jean-Christophe Olivier-Morin to answer that question, if that's okay.
Sure, because indeed annotation is one of the main challenges in this pipeline, which was told before. And indeed, if AI is a system, it has a starting layer, which is acquiring data, but then getting some ground truth out of this data to train the algorithms. And whatever the system is, we know that it's a human in the end who is annotating and giving the ground truth. Now comes the point that indeed with new techniques like federated learning, where you have several locations which are able to address several data, the fact that the annotators are not a homogeneous group of people. They come with different backgrounds or different ways of learning and annotating. This creates another layer of complexity into creating a well-curated, non-biased, and robust set of annotated ground truth images, which will then be used by all the algorithms in these consortiums. So one of the major issues is how do we standardize annotation? Is it through evolved tools? Is it through AI algorithms themselves? This is yet to be determined, but it's a major challenge.
Yes, we face this challenge on a daily basis. One of the things and topics we are actually exploring is this concept of swarm intelligence, basically doing consensus grading with all the graders on the same platform. I'm not sure where this will go because it really depends on who influences the other annotator, whether you're creating a biased set of annotations. So I think the difficulties of this are pretty clear. The only way I think we will solve some of these issues is basically deploying the models and then doing basically continuous learning as more and more physicians test it out in the field. But there are different ways of doing these, developing these models, correct? We can build models which are based on existing features which exist in the images. For example, the volume of the tumor, or for example, the signal intensity in an image, the bone density, etc. And then you get a model which you can actually explain the features of the model quite clearly. My question is, what happens when you have a data-driven model which you've developed using images of one disease versus controls, and you get a model? How do you explain the performance of such a model, and how do you deploy this to the physicians and explain it to them?
So I guess this question is also for me.
Yes.
Which narrows down to model explainability. And this is one of the frontier topics nowadays in AI research, because indeed the questions that you very profoundly spoke are there for the community, and there is indeed no yet established solution to it. Explainability is somehow a way to open the black box, which everyone from the layman to the specialist is okay to put on these deep neural networks decisions, which indeed are trained, which have been tested, but we all know as practitioners or theoreticians of the field that instabilities are there, robustness is not always present, and that some weird solutions are brought by AI even to very simple systems. So explainability is not only being able to have a human understanding how the black box works, but it's also a way to control which are the critical parameters in any AI or learning process on which the output can be predictable as well. So you see that stability, robustness of AI and credibility in terms of ethics, legal aspects, or even health issues are central to the evolution and acceptance by the global society of these new techniques, which are very promising, but can be somehow scaring. So we have to deal with this type of questions.
Jean-Christophe, just very briefly, do you believe that there is a place for saliency maps and heat maps and so on for the interpretability of AI models in imaging?
Well, definitely. And there are many other techniques which will complement and use the techniques that you just mentioned, like domain adaptation or transfer learning, which indeed will reinforce the field and make it more robust.
Great, thank you so much. I think it's coming down to that point in the webinar where we must transition to the second topic, basically. And this is a great segue because we've talked about the explicability of AI algorithms for the interpretation of images of characterizing diseases. But the overwhelming question still remains that once you have developed a model, there is clearly a pathway for translating this into the clinic. There are validation steps where you want to validate them with a small group of physicians and radiologists potentially, and then move it into a bigger state of external validation, and ultimately deploy it to clinic so that you can use it for actually improving patient outcome, patient management, and so on. So during this process of translating and validating these algorithms, there are several individuals or several cadre of people that we have to deal with. We have to deal with radiologists, we have to deal with physicians, we have to deal with many people where perhaps the culture and the interpretability, the intent to interpret AI algorithms may be variable. So the next question that I'm really going to pose is to Christopher Hess and a few of the other panelists. How do radiologists perceive AI? Will there be adaptability? What will it take for this to become a tool that is just underlining all image analysis? And what will the role of the radiologists and physicians be thereby? It's a fairly big question, and maybe we can start with Chris Hess.
Thanks, Sharmila. I think I could probably speak an hour on this subject. It is the big question, and I would say it's the biggest question kind of a lot of recent developments. a lot of models, a lot of algorithms work well in the lab, but then when they translate to the clinic, they fail, they fall, they're brittle. How do radiologists perceive AI? I would say as a helpful partner, most radiologists. Are they ready to adopt AI? I would say yes, but carefully. There's a lot at stake when you're talking about patient lives. And radiology as a field is constantly reinventing itself and adopting new technology. I think that's the reason that many of us, many radiologists, myself included, went into the field in the first place. All of these algorithms that we're talking about are essentially models. That's why we're talking about reproducibility. That's why we're talking about feasibility and brittleness and a lot of practical variables. And I think it's just so important to understand what works and what doesn't as a model. As Dr. Comaniciu so eloquently said, you know, there's a famous saying by statistician George Box who said that all models are wrong. I think that's very true, but some are useful. And so the position of radiology right now is let's figure out what's useful, what will work in enterprise scale practice, and what won't work. So in radiology, I think we're really kind of positioned to kick the tires on the new models. I think as a radiologist, you also have to look at the problems with radiology now. So a lot of the problems that we have are enterprise delivery of care. So navigating through such large volumes of data, removing some of the non-complex work, I would say that it's kind of redirecting the manual to the cognitive. So radiologists spending a lot of time measuring things, I think is not exactly practicing at their license. I think radiologists are also really keen to integrate data from multiple sources right now. So it's not just looking at images, it's looking at the whole landscape of prior images and the data from the electronic medical record. And there's a lot of questions about how do I put all of this together. I think radiologists are also very interested in the ability to kind of quantify and see new patterns in data, perhaps some of the new patterns that we have not been trained on or seen. But at its core, I think the value of AI is really focused on what can we use it for to improve patient care.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Jayashree, do you have a viewpoint on this issue?
Sure. I mean, I echo everything that was mentioned before. From what we have seen in trying to get these models implemented is one of the things that we run up against is these models tend to be pretty narrow. So you might have a model that just does one specific thing. It classifies one particular disease. But obviously, a radiologist's task is much, much more complex than that. So we need to think about how do we transition to building models that are just not solving, does this patient have pneumonia or not, but do they have pneumonia or not, and many of the other things that might be present in that image. And part of that is the complexity of deploying this into the workflow. So if you have 100 different models coming from 100 different vendors, each of which is solving a small part of the chest X-ray reading process, how does that actually get to the hands of the clinician is something that as a community we need to think about how do we actually make that happen. The other thing is that a lot of these models don't necessarily have some sense of uncertainty. So they just say yes or no without any sense of confidence in their assessment. And sometimes they can be confidently wrong as well. And so there is where the explainability aspects of it are potentially really important to build trust. So model types that are inherently explainable may help radiologists gain some trust into the system compared to a completely black box type of model where it just says yes or no with absolutely no sense of why. In terms of the tasks that a radiologist might do and where AI can help, we have this entire spectrum from what radiologists do well today, but maybe the AI can make it faster. So measuring tumors and things like that, change detection, things like that as one end of things. But there's a whole other class that was mentioned before where the AI seems to be able to see things that maybe are not easily seen by the humans, such as developing risk, getting breast cancer 5 years in the future or 2 years in the future, or looking at fundus images and saying whether somebody is going to get Alzheimer's, or even looking at fundus images and saying if it's the age and the gender and the health of the patient. So there's a lot more information in the images than potentially that we see, and hopefully that entire spectrum is something we can look at, from sort of very quantifiable measuring tumor size to this things that are much harder to visually see in the image.
Agree. You've both raised very important issues, but one question that I struggle with when you talk about deployment to clinic and building trust, we always talk about a qualitative feeling of building trust. What are the metrics that we can actually use so that we are taking sort of absolutely, categorical steps towards building this trust? Are there metrics in your mind, Chris, that one could use towards establishing some of these features?
Well, that's a good question. So what is trust? I think if your AI algorithm decides, what's your next Netflix watch, then the level of kind of regret, if you will, is very low. If the AI algorithm is designing what chemotherapy you should take because you have cancer, the level of regret for picking the wrong cancer agent is very high. So it kind of varies across the spectrum of what you're going to apply AI to, but in general, for low regret applications, I think the barrier is much lower. For high regret applications, people will want to see several variables. They'll want to see reproducibility, number one. So even if it's reliably wrong, as Dr. Kalpathy-Kramer said, they will want to know what the algorithm says, and then it will be very dependent on kind of proven track records. So the way we usually do this in medicine is with clinical trials. So if you take a machine that decides a cancer agent, you have to run through a number of patients and decide and see their outcome, because the ultimate value is going to be on outcome. So we can assess individual short-term metrics, but the real gold pie in the sky is to look at the long-term metrics. Is there an impact on outcome, and does that bring value to the patient equation?
Thank you. This sort of segues very nicely into the next question or the next set of topics that I would like to address, and that is combining the medical imaging outputs or algorithms or joint algorithms, which include data from other sources, the electronic health records, ultimately genomics, ultimately pathology. How is this going to impact the field? And clearly this is going to have a major impact, far greater than each of the individual applications of AI and pathology or in imaging. So with that, I want to ask Stanley Durman to address some of these issues where we can correlate the imaging with other fields to sort of provide a complete diagnosis or disease picture. You're on mute.
Yes, absolutely, Sharmila. Thanks for your question. We are focused a lot on radiology and imaging, and we rightly do so because this is where AI is probably the most promising. However, as you said, we should keep in mind that to support diagnosis or even to support a decision about the good therapy, imaging alone might not be sufficient, and we might want to combine that with other sources of information. So you mentioned the far-fetched use of genomics data, possibly IoT, like if your Apple Watch can also to support this decision. But we can also look much, be more realistic, and for instance, just the clinical examination by itself might be informative. So in neuroscience, for instance, we have a huge series of assessment to measure the different cognitive deficit or behavioral impairments. That's already something quite complex. And this is key to establish a good diagnosis and a good prognosis in these areas. So I believe we need to build a model that could combine imaging with other types of data. And this is particularly challenging because each of these data alone is already, as we have seen, a challenge in itself, but combining it with very various dimensions, very various heterogeneity, different sources of variability is really difficult, I think, and it's a barrier, a challenge that we need to address.
Great. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, I think there is even more than that because, for instance, you might see in the image some brain lesion at the patient today, and relating this to the state of the cognition of the patient the same day might not be so useful, because what the brain lesion is indicative of what will be the state of the patient in a few years to come. So I think we really need to think about this problem in terms of dynamical changes and how the progressive changes that we see in images correlate with the worsening of the symptoms over time. And that's very true for the neurodegenerative diseases, for instance. And I mean, deep learning techniques today are not very well suited to address this change when you have just few repeated observation of the patient over time and you need to assess what will be the state of the patient in the future. So this is also, I think, a big areas for research. And for instance, in my lab, we have developed and patented such a technique, and others do. And I think this is key to bring also more value to the use of imaging into the clinics.
Great, thank you so much. So you're talking more in terms of modeling the trajectory of the disease, using the clinical data, given that the imaging data sets are temporally not as frequently acquired as the clinical data. So I think it's going to be a fairly important issue in terms of deploying AI to characterize any disease completely. I think
Absolutely.
I would like, yeah.
And the time lapse, sorry, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
The time between the moment you see the alteration in the image and the time you see the behavioral or cognitive deficit might be very different across subjects, because you have a lot of compensatory mechanism into play, and that makes this particularly challenging, I think.
It does, but then the question is, do you really have all the data that you need to do this kind of trajectory modeling? The only place where you can do, I mean, we've had some experience with the osteoarthritis initiative. It is seldom that you have a well-curated data set of 10 years of images and disease and all the characteristics. When you have that, then you can do the trajectory modeling. Otherwise, given how imaging has evolved over time, clinical imaging has evolved, the use of it has evolved over time, building these data sets, I think, becomes somewhat of an issue. And I think under those circumstances, even simple a shallow classifier attached to your medical imaging algorithm will actually improve the disease diagnosis. What is the gender? What is the body mass index of this individual? Will actually improve the prediction of the model. And I think with that, I want to give Stephanie Alessonier a chance to give us her experience.
Well, thank you. I would like to complete what has been said just a minute ago. There are many things that characterize the diagnosis. Disease is a combination or occurrence of phenotypes and biomarkers. And to be able to give the diagnosis to a person, then you have to go all along through the path of examinations. It could include images, but it could also be very different. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm working more on rare diseases where the ordering of the diagnosis, the examination, sorry, is really crucial to reduce the time to diagnosis. So for example, in SONIU, we've proposed a companion tool to really help the sonographer optimize the examination of the fetus to be able to reach as soon as possible the diagnosis, which could be that the baby is fine, but actually it will help the sonographer to go from one organ to the other, try to find out what's wrong inside the organ and move to the most informative organs next to it. And these path has to be optimized in a so high dimensional space that nothing except AI can be used. So the techniques of artificial intelligence appear necessary both for the image interpretation, try to characterize the abnormality inside the sonographic exam, but also to improve the path that the sonographer has to do his own exam on a specific patient. So as you see, AI is everywhere, not only inside the image, but around the image, how to go and get the correct one at the good time. So this is to me, this is really an impressive challenge, especially for rare diseases.
Great, thank you so much. There's a question that comes to my mind, and I'm just going to put it out to potentially Chris has to answer, given that he is one of the radiologists on this panel. And that is, there are so many diseases, so many images, so many organ systems, so many possible applications. If you were a person, a imaging scientist or a data scientist, etc., when it comes to choosing the application, the biggest bang for your buck would be based on what metrics?
Well, now we're really talking about the $1 million question, aren't we? So that's, boy, I've thought a lot about this. So how can we, there's so many points at which an enterprising scientist or innovator could look at our imaging equation, our value equation. I think of these as kind of upstream and downstream. There's been a lot of focus on the downstream. So the downstream would be more on the kind of analytics. Can I detect a hemorrhage? Even further downstream, can I do track a disease trajectory? But I think the real money, if you will, literally the money, is on the upstream equation. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you have a headache and if you go to a health system like UCSF or anywhere else, and you get an MRI scan, realize that even getting to the MRI scan can be hard. But then when you get to the MRI scan, you'll go to one of 20 or 25 scanners, and one of our 90 technologists will scan the image. You may move a little bit, the parameters of the scan may change, and ultimately, you know, your image will look a little bit different for any single time you come. So if I came on the same day and went to any of those scanners, or I moved to a different health system, so that creates a fundamental measurement variability. You know, it's above and beyond the biologic variability that we're looking for. So I think one of the earliest targets to really add value is to reduce the variability, because variability drives cost. And to do that upstream, to look at the kind of enterprise delivery of imaging to make sure that the patient gets the same imaging in a economically sound duration of time across the system.
Great, thank you. This has actually enabled us to think of what our next webinar could be about. But before I transition and have Elodie ask the questions from the audience, maybe I could ask Dorin to give me a viewpoint as to when it comes to algorithms and applications, what is your strategy, given that you are in a different space, not a physician, but providing the solutions?
Thank you so much, Sharmila. And maybe I can also address now, also there is a question on the chat, if anyone had any experience submitting AI to the US FDA and so, right? And maybe it's part of the same story, right? So, we have quite a bit of experience passing algorithms from the development into the product, right? I believe we have more than 50 offers currently on the market, and so, and it should be noted, right? And I'm oversimplifying for the purpose of this panel and the audience, but number one is that regulatory is very, very different from country to country, right? Number two is that in the case of FDA, there is a certain stratification of the class 1, class 2, class 3 application. For example, when you talk about triaging, signaling something in the scan, or CAD-E when application is intended to highlight some area of interest. These are studies that are requiring a 510K study. On the other hand, when we talk about CAD-X system, systems that indicate the likelihood of the presence of the disease, then we talk about pre-market approval, which is a much more involved process, right? And I would very much link to what Christopher mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that the regulatory approval is also considers how much risk provides to the patient the application of a certain algorithm. The more risk, the more impact on the patient life, the more studies are needed to prove the concept. Yeah. So now, just to answer your question, Sharmila, right? So, so as I mentioned, we see AI impacting multiple levels, starting from the scanners. Scanners are becoming more and more automated and more precise due to AI. That's one level. Second is the topic that is centered on this panel on the reading and reporting. And here there is a lot of discussion, what should be done on site versus what should be done on the cloud, depending on the setting of each organization. And then you have the topics have been discussed here on the data integration and precision medicine, how the data comes together to help making a decision for the patient, what should be done at this moment for this patient, right? So to me, this topic is certainly fascinating, and the fast pace everything is evolving. It's very stimulating, and my hope is that AI will advance such that will help improving medicine, reducing its cost, but also what is also very important for all of us is to expand medicine to many people in need.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we are sort of ending the close of our second segment in terms of topics. Before we move on, Elodie, do you want to ask a few of the questions that I think there are one or two questions from the audience that we could put forward in the Q&A box?
Maybe I will ask only one of them for the sake of time.
Yeah.
I will keep this one on the explainability of models. So one of the attendees is asking about the explainability techniques that have been used successfully to explain to doctor, to the patient, why this algorithm is giving this result. So if you could elaborate maybe on this, Jean-Christophe or someone else, for the audience, what technical solutions are around there to provide explainability, and what are the ones that have been demonstrated to work successfully?
Well, I will start the answer, but I will leave the other participants in the panel to complement my answer. I would say that unfortunately, nowadays, I'm not aware of any example where model explainability has been successfully applied to the full features of any model. There have been many tries and projects on trying to understand through silent maps, for example, but also visualization of high-dimensional data, how the features are linked to parameters or structures in the image that a human could understand. To my knowledge, but again, I'm not a specialist of medical imaging. This is why I would also call the other panelists to answer. There is no such a proven algorithm which has been yet produced, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Abdul could answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So thank you guys for kind of setting this up. It's a really big question, and I think it's a question of what kind of algorithms are we looking at and how are they structured. I think one of the, if the question is about explainability of an algorithm that looks at a patient as a whole, and we talked about sort of using multimodal data, which is something that I'm happy to comment on. I think it makes a lot of sense. But if you show the patient the whole thing and then you say, oh, please go ahead, or the AI, and then you say, make a prediction, that's much harder to explain. However, what we found is you can actually use AI, and going back to sort of what Christophe and Dorin and the whole team were talking about, to do more basic tasks that can be easily verifiable, but they're really, really helpful. So for instance, when one of the things that we're doing at Tempus is sort of enabling precision medicine. What does that mean, right? It means that when I'm looking at a patient and I'm trying, the big decisions that a physician and a patient need to make are, what treatments am I gonna have? Should I be in a clinical trial? Which one do I match? If you wanna do decisions like that, right, which is stepping a little bit from just using imaging, you need to include imaging, you need to include genomics data, DNA, RNA, even pathology and histology type information. You can look at the image as a whole in an abstract way, or you can use AI to actually extract metrics out of an image like that, right? So if I'm looking at the pathology image, how large are the cells? How close are they together? These type of applications are actually easily verifiable, right? Once you actually run them, similar to kind of what Christoph said, if you create a box around AI where you say, I want you to measure certain things, I want you to add certain things, I want you to extract certain information out of an image, then you can come back and easily verify it. For instance, in self-driving, when you're trying to create an algorithm, you can have one that just drives the car end to end, and those are hard to verify. Or you can say, I want an algorithm to go and detect humans in an image. In that case, you can actually go and verify against that. So I think we've seen success a lot when the tasks are broken down and the AI is built in a hierarchical way where there are systems around it that verify it. And I think that has to be sort of the future, right? Because in a way, you always want the human intelligence to come in. What we need to realize is AI is a wonderful tool, but it has its limits, as the panel has just shared. It's very capable of learning certain things once you've defined them for them. And then on top of that, you can apply expert systems to bring the whole story together. In the instance of precision medicine, like I said, for the patient perspective, what treatments work, and you bring it. But also, what's really interesting, and I've had the chance of getting involved in over the last couple of weeks, is there's the pharma side of this, right? Like when we talk about, hey, what are the benefits of AI for us as a human, you know, as humans? One thing is, okay, tell me which treatment is going to work for me. That's really great. But if I came to you and I said, people with your own DNA and RNA, and we got a little bit more specific about what makes us, you know, different from each other and respond differently to treatments, it would only be helpful if there were actually many different treatments and many different drugs. And I think AI is really having a massive impact in, as we understand the population at the DNA level, and actually developing treatments at that level as well, and having many, many more treatments. I mean, I could imagine a future when we talk about practicing medicine differently, a future in 50 years or even less, hopefully, where if I got a migraine, I can go to a drug company and they will create a medication that has my name on it that works just specifically for me. So I think it's really an exciting future for us with AI coming in. We got to think about how it's going to apply in different ways. But back specifically, I think if I've seen great examples of explainability if the problem is broken down to a smaller level.
May I also comment? Yes?
Yes, go ahead.
So maybe Jean-Christophe, I can share with you some recent work of ours on quantifying predictive uncertainty for, in this case, for the assessment of X-ray images. And so just to, in a couple of words, so we use Dempster-Schaffer theory of evidence and the principles of subjective logic to formulate how do you estimate the predictive uncertainty from the data, right? Because we see the AI system in evolving to eliminate such their current brittleness, and to graciously say, I'm confident on this result, or I'm not confident on this result, right?
Now, this I am aware of these works and the ones that Abdul, but the question was more a global explainability of a system. And this, I mean, breaking down the parts of algorithm and trying to explain these parts, we all know that this has been done. A full system which is explainable, I haven't seen it, but this is why I was more precautious in my answer, not to also have people think that everything is solved already.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been an interesting discussion. I would like to lead Elodie to the last segment of this webinar.
So in this last part, we're going to talk about innovative algorithm, how they make it to the clinic and how they make it to products in companies. So let's start with the first part. So, you know, AI technology has not been mostly invented for medical application. It's coming from different scientific fields. It's coming from different industries. And the way to make it useful in the clinic involves multidisciplinary research. So there are a number of challenges associated with that, to have AI scientists working with medical doctors. And I would like our panelists to comment on this, on their experience. So maybe to start with, from the AI scientist point of view, Stephanie, could you comment on the success factors and the pitfalls you have encountered collaborating with medical doctors?
Yes, thank you. So to move a new technology into the clinic, you have, to my point of view, two choices. You either give your technology to the medical field, a medical doctor directly, or you commercialize it. You can think that the first idea would be the best because it would be faster and less expensive. But as I experienced, when people are facing AI, especially, they are more confident when the device, or well, it's a medical device now, AI technologies, is fully validated. And my point of view on this is that when doing only research, we usually provide prototypes and we do not take enough time to go through all the validation steps that are often not as strong as they should do. And should go for example, for an FDA approval or a CE marked product. So this is why the second option, which is commercialize it, is usually the most efficient way. And it means that you have to do all the steps with the clinicians. So you start with them from their needs, you do the research in close collaboration with them, and always trying to keep track of their real needs and what they really require. And then you go through commercialization process, all through the validation and the mark, and that helps to adopt it, for them to adopt it. This is my point of view. So this is the only way I have been able to go and make my tools to be used on a clinical basis.
So you would recommend collaboration to develop the tool, but then commercialization
all along,
to disseminate it?
All along the way.
So maybe from the medical doctor side, then could you comment on your experience of co-developing these tools with AI scientist, Dr. S, and possibly also on what Stephanie just shared about the idea of disseminating through startups?
Yeah, I have several thoughts on that line. And just to amplify what Stephanie said, I think a collaborative approach is absolutely essential in order to kind of bring some of these to market. And that's really why we have been working with NVIDIA and with Chiron and other companies to really innovate technology. Because I think a lot of the innovation is happening in the world of startups. There's just, it's fueled by a different mechanism, but it is innovation that we need to capitalize on. I think, you know, maybe what isn't said here is, if you think about AI and the evolution of AI and when it'll be adopted, when it'll be commercialized, I think a large part of it will be when we don't even talk about AI. I suggest AI will actually, it's just a new technology that will enter our lexicon, it will enter our machines, it will enter our technology, it'll enter our practice in a seamless fashion where we don't even know it's there. You know, I'm not sure we would have had a panel 30, 40 years ago, you know, or what's going to happen with CPUs, something like that. They just were worked into the technology of the time and they became part of our normal practice. The other thing I would say with respect to kind of adoption is keep in mind, there's really only 3 or 4 clinical variables that we talk about when we talk about value. And those, you know, from a clinical standpoint, those are access, quality, and cost. And then you can argue some efficiency, but essentially there's only 3 or 4 variables there. So in order to achieve each of those variables, it has to be done within the ecosystem of our current healthcare landscapes, which varies from country to country. And it has to be done in collaboration with many lenses. So an academic lens, startup lenses, and indeed, I would say the agreement and adoption of the large big vendors as well.
So thank you for sharing this. So once you have created medical value with a technique, once it has, you think as a medical doctor, it can be useful, it can bring something to you. That may not be enough to make it a product. There's still a long road in development. This is a long road in regulatory affairs. There's still also a challenge to find robust business models to disseminate it. So that's what we're gonna talk about now. And I would like to ask different panelists here, if they have experience in delivering useful algorithm into products, and what the reason could be for useful algorithms to not become products. What have you experienced as a failure possibility? What reasons could stop the deployment of some medical AI-based algorithm into commercialization in the world? So Dr. Alabi, could you comment on this maybe?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting topic, because as you see a lot of innovation, how do you really bring it to the market? And I think I'd like us to just take maybe one step back and think about, why are we doing all of this, right? Again, to help physicians serve their patients, right? And take care of their patients. They're overloaded to start with. So what Chris mentioned initially is really important. We have a massive shortage of physicians. They're severely overloaded. So I think the only way that you're going to be able to bring AI is in a general matter. And I'm not talking about building AI. Building AI it's really important to involve the physicians, because it's really all it's doing is translating their knowledge into algorithms. So very important to collaborate there. But I think beyond that, you really have to hide it. I mean, it has to come in and be hidden in the workflow. It has to kind of make your life better. If I have to pick up my phone and think, it's like, oh, instead of talking to, and I'm not going to say the magic word to turn on the voice recognition, but if like I had to press 5 buttons to do it, and then it will actually enable me to do voice search, and that's not a great experience. And I think that's what we're offering physicians today when we're bringing AI. These are some of the biggest barriers to actually adoption of AI today. It's like, oh, please come in, and if you saw this patient, go ahead and look at this other screen so that you can go and check AI over there. So I think for a successful AI to work, it needs to be hidden. And I think the examples that I've seen so far are, where AI has enabled you to create a device that was never possible before. For example, we see examples in Butterfly Networks, one of the world's first mobile MRs, right? And just an example, right? When again, I'll go back to I'm just new to this, but at least on the testing side, right? When you're able to embed results that were never possible before to be shown to a physician, right? Of examples of, look, all of these clinical trials now match your patient because we've looked at their DNA in addition to their clinical history together, right? So I think when it provides value to the physician without having them to exit out of their workflow and incur more effort than they already have to, then we're going to succeed. The other reason why we need to kind of really watch out for is financial incentives. I've seen an amazing AI that was really actually better for physicians and better for patients not make it through because of financial incentives. And you have to realize that there's a prescribing physician, there's a diagnostician, there's a hospital administrator, there is a technician that's working. And the decision point for when to invoke the AI usually has a benefit and a cost to the person that's making it. And unless the incentives are aligned for you to go down the AI path, you may actually have challenges, because you're transferring some of the money around. Now in France, probably that's less of a problem because you've got a system, and in Canada, I'm Canadian, we've got one system that kind of takes care of everybody. So the financial incentives are not as big of a deal. When you come to a system like the United States, it makes a big difference. And who's the prescribing physician? And if they're moving money from radiology, say, to pathology or oncology to cardiology or so on, then there's a challenge there.
So you would argue that integration is a major point well, for this technology to integrate into workflow for wide adoption, and products should be designed in the sense that they should not be an additional layer. They should come smoothly. The AI should come smoothly to the medical doctor, and you see that as a key success factor for nicely designed products.
Yeah, well, number one, integration, you need to really be hidden. Number two, think big. Like, don't think about just taking whatever has been done today and I'm just gonna make it faster and more innovative. I think what can be done now that you have AI, if you really believe that AI enabled you to do something different, how are you gonna change healthcare? By creating this new insight or creating this new device. Like, think really big. Like, those are the things that are, I think, gonna be massive, because the other stuff is going to get commoditized very quickly. So if I'm talking to a startup today, I wouldn't say go and create another lung cancer detector algorithm, right? It's just like some of this stuff is just going to be commoditized. Hopefully Dorin is working so hard to embed it into his instruments.
May I say though, but
yeah,
we are
please.
not at the, I'm a mute, no. We're not yet at the stage where AI is processing the chest CT to come up with a trusted report. So I'm arguing there is much more to be done to provide this value to the radiologist, right?
Yeah, a few more years, don't worry.
Yeah.
And so, Dorin, so now may I ask you to comment on this transition from the research to the products within a company like yours? Well, you're an historical player in that game. So now moving into developing this AI algorithm as medical devices, how would you characterize the typical path from a research project to a project that you will validate, certified, FDA cleared, and distribute? What are the key decision points and the key bottlenecks?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, everything that Abdul mentioned, right? There are very, very good points, right? On the integration of AI, this is perhaps the strongest point regarding the value creation. But at the same time, right, integration also relates to the performance of algorithms and also to the comprehensiveness of algorithms. Because if we have, you see, we have this discussion about algorithms, which I don't feel that it's the right direction. Because ultimately we have to talk about AI solutions that are solving an unmet need for clinicians. And that's where we need to go, right? To say what part of the clinical work can be helped by artificial intelligence with proper integration and so on and so forth. Now, to answer your question, there are certainly, in a large company like ours, we have established pipeline of value creation, starting from the definition of the product to the proper data handling with everything, all the aspects, going through the regulatory and ultimately to the integration. And it's a process that is getting better and better. At the same time, right, we have open platforms where we bring the activities of startups, right, onto such platforms. We have a Siemens Healthineers digital ecosystem where we bring various startups. We have various platforms for prototypes to be tested, such as Singo via Open App, Singo via Frontier, AI Rep Companion Research, and so on and so forth. So there is a sense of community, right, where both outside and inside innovation are contributing ultimately to create a value for the clinicians and for their patients.
So maybe it's already well post 6 p.m. there, so post 9 in the US. maybe I'm not going to open the box of who's going to pay for this, but that's also a major box that goes aside this question of how do we do this technically, and then how do we bring it to patients, how do we create value for patients, and then how we do explain that to patients and doctors, or are we making sense for this tool in the workflows? But that's a big question of how to widely develop and disseminate this new software, these new tools, these new solutions. And the answer is also not the same depending on countries, depending on the reimbursement systems. But probably going into this now would be, for the sake of time, a bit difficult. But if maybe one panelist has a very generic comment about these issues of who will pay for this ultimately, the insurances, the hospitals, the patient themselves, then I would encourage you to go ahead now.
I think we are losing our panelists very quickly. What I would suggest that I would really like to thank Jean-Baptiste and QBI and others for giving us a chance to do this, and all the panelists for being here. And this topic that Elodie introduced be a topic of a future webinar. How do you think about that? So with that, I think we should conclude because we've lost 50% of our panelists. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
an excellent day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.